very impressed with the work she's been doing at the university for a couple of years now, or about 2 years?
No, just under 2.
2 years, okay, great. So she has a huge challenge. She's come here both as a clinician and a leader. And today, she's going to talk a lot about the leadership challenges. And I talked to her about the fact that you've met everybody now that you see the challenges are how to lead. So rather than talking about all the hospital and everything, we'll get to that, but I think the big thing is going to be about some of the approaches to leadership at a large organization to help your at a changing time. So, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. So first of all, I would just want to thank all of you for introducing yourselves and for giving me a flavor of what each of you does. And I really am looking forward to getting to know those of you that I don't know well. A number of you I've had the great pleasure of working with already, and it really has been a wonderful treat. And I'm looking forward to a lot more. You have a short handout in front of you, and my goals during the organized part of my conversation are really to do just 3 things. And really it's on Rob's instructions. But first is just to give you a short overview about how I got here, my path to Michigan. Second is to give you my little instruction, what I call my 7 C's of successful leadership. And to end with what I consider 5 lessons of good leaders. And those were my instructions. But during the discussion, I hope that I will touch a little bit on some of the challenges of healthcare, and I will touch on those during my comments. And I think during the discussion period, we probably should touch on what is happening with healthcare reform. What does it mean to the University of Michigan? What does it mean to healthcare in the state of Michigan? And where are we going? And I do want to make sure that I leave time for that today. And if we don't get to all of that, maybe you'll invite me again next year, and we'll get there. But of course, it's such a changing environment that whatever we talk about today is without doubt going to be completely different, really in 2 weeks, but for sure a year from now. With that, let me just launch into telling you about why I even came to Michigan in the nadir of the national economy, and for sure the nadir in the Michigan economy, because that's probably a question that deserves to be answered. So let me tell you a bit about myself. And I don't know really where to start, but I'll start with my professional career. So I went to college and medical school at Northwestern. I was in a 6-year medical school program, something like what existed here at the University of Michigan at the time, an Interflex program. And at that time I met my husband. I actually met him on the first day of New Student Week for me. And like probably other women at the time, because there were relatively few women in medical school, I ended up following my husband for 4 professional moves. I was in Chicago, I followed him to Minnesota, then I followed him to Washington, then I followed him back to Minnesota, and then I followed him to Indiana. And during that time, we managed to have 3 wonderful children who today are ages 23 to 27. And interestingly, they're in some of the professions that the rest of you mentioned when you went around the room telling me what you did. One of them is a lawyer in New York, in a big Manhattan law firm. One of them is, actually none of you mentioned this profession, one of them is in graduate school to become an architect, and one of them is a journalist. Not a very good profession these days, I have to say. She's in broadcast journalism, interviewing today, as a matter of fact, for a job in Minneapolis. So, but I managed to squeeze those in during the time that I was also working professionally. And really, my last move, which was to Indianapolis, was a very interesting one. We spent 21 years in Indianapolis, and it was a really spectacular move, not a move that I made by choice. And I do want to say, in terms of leadership tips, a lot was learned for me by that move, because it's really interesting that you can take circumstances that are not ones that you choose and turn them into ones that turn out to be really wonderful things. And so during that time, I actually went there kicking and screaming. I had never heard of Indianapolis. I considered it India no place. when I got there, because I had grown up actually in Washington, D.C. It did evolve into a really wonderful city during the 21 years that I lived there, but it was really horrible for me to think about going there. It turned out to be really quite wonderful, because during that time, I ended up acquiring one position after another, and by the time I left in May of 2009, I was actually holding 3 major positions. I was the CEO of Rayle Hospital, which is the country's 6th largest children's hospital, Indiana's major children's hospital, a very formidable children's hospital. I was the Dean for Research in the IU School of Medicine, and I was the interim vice president for research for Indiana University. So I was able to, over time, rise up through the ranks, both academically and in a separate organization, the hospital system, which was affiliated but not part of the university, moved to acquire a number of very interesting positions. So it was really very fulfilling. So you might ask, why would I leave 3 positions that I was really very happy with and come to Michigan in the nadir of Michigan's economy? So I want to tell you about why I chose to do that in May of 2009. Well, it started with a headhunter who contacted me and said, we have this really interesting job, and we think you should look at it. And by the way, during all that period, I'd been approached a lot of times for jobs from all over the country. First of all, you have to recognize that there are relatively few women in the positions that I was in, and they're always looking for diversity. Even if they don't really mean to hire women, they have to. They have to recruit, and so they always have to put women in the pool for searches. So I was contacted probably weekly, monthly, for various searches. I still am. And it's just part of the process. Even if they don't intend to recruit them, they have to look for them. So, but there was something about this position that attracted me, and I'll tell you what it was, because it's something that is structurally important that you should understand that distinguishes our academic health system from all others around the country. So I want you to know what it is. There was something that was appealing to me right away on the application. And that is that the University of Michigan health system is one of only a handful in the country in which the hospitals and health centers and the medical school are under one umbrella. And we are integrated in a way that no other health system is truly integrated. What I mean by that, you mentioned Doug Strong earlier. Doug Strong, the CEO of our hospitals, and Jim Walscroft, the dean of our medical school, report to my role. It wasn't me necessarily, but the idea is that they report to one position. What that means is that there is an alignment between the hospitals and the medical school and nursing school, as it turns out. And this is a very important thing, which allows us to make decisions and allows us to really put our money where our mouth is in a way that very few other academic medical centers can do anywhere in the country. A lot of other places say they want to do that, but they're not able to do that. So my prior institution and most other academic institutions are simply unable to do that. So that was very attractive. So that's what allowed me to put my name in the hat. My husband encouraged me to do that, and so I did. But I really was never planning to come, to tell you the truth. But that's why I applied. So anyway, I applied. I went for the first interview. It was very interesting. I went for an airport interview. I was somewhat surprised when I got a call that said, you're one of 3 finalists. I said, okay, very nice. So the good news was I had 3 jobs. I had 3 bosses. I told all 3 bosses. I went for this very nice interview. It was kind of interesting. And I just want you to know, I went for the interview. So one day, I was in a meeting with one of the bosses. And I wasn't alone, but I had told the one boss, and by the way, all men, because that's the world I live in, all men. I was sitting in a meeting with the group of men and that boss, and my beeper went off, my BlackBerry went off, and I ignored it. So it went off a few times, went off a few more times, and then finally there was a knock on the door, and my assistant comes in, and she says, you weren't answering your beeper, but you've got to know President Mary Sue Coleman is on the phone. And everybody in the room, all these men, look up and say, What's that about? I said, well, I don't know. So I better get it. Well, it was Mary Sue telling me that the university was going to purchase the North Campus Research Complex, that's what we call it today, the former Pfizer facility. Good thing is I had told them that I had gone for the interview. Well, that really changed my perspective. Because when I came back into the room, I could only think about that. Because I realized in that moment that that decision to purchase the former Pfizer facility was transformational. And that's when I went from just being casually interested in the position to recognizing that this was something I could become very interested in. Because all of a sudden I realized that this was something that could be transformational for the University of Michigan, for the region in Ann Arbor, for the state of Michigan, and frankly for me as a career opportunity. And that is really when I said, if I get offered that position, I gotta go there. So that night I went home, I talked to my husband about it, I said, you know, I have to go back for a second interview if they invite me to do that. And of course, that's why Mary Sue called me. She knew that I'd be interested in it. And so, make a long story short, I really believe that we have tremendous opportunities. But that was really what got me, it caught me and caught my attention. And we can talk later, I think, in the discussion about why this is such an incredible opportunity. It wasn't my intent today to talk specifically about the NCRC, but I'd be delighted to spend more time on it. I have a lot of passion about it, and I think it would be a great topic. Now, what a difference 2 years makes, because let's take a minute and talk about what we think about healthcare reform in this 2-year period of time, because this has been just an incredible roller coaster. The first talk that I gave when I came to the University of Michigan on healthcare reform was completely different than what I would tell you today about healthcare reform. Because I have to tell you, when I first started to talk about this here, we were, first of all, 100% certain that it was a fait accompli. We were 100% certain that we knew what was likely to happen in terms of its general acceptance. We did not know for certain what the impact was going to be on us as a health system, but we were pretty certain that it was going to happen. And we were somewhat certain that we knew what it would look like. We really, today, have no idea. And that's because every time we turn around, something is different about it. As I think you know, just a year after the Accountable Care Act became law, there has been there are new regulations coming out every day. So just last week, for example, the official documentation on the regulations from CMS have come out, and we're reading these 400 pages diligently to try to understand what they mean. But exactly what they mean are still really unknown, and they're likely to change day after day after day. And so it's really very hard to know exactly what to anticipate. But Michigan is really a microcosm for the rest of the nation. Now, there are some things about Michigan that are unique. So we're the only state in the country that is losing census. So that is different. But so many of the other things are in fact similar to the rest of the country. So for example, our population is aging. We are losing pediatric population. That is a challenge for us, especially since we've just built an $800 million children's and women's hospital. And so that is a unique problem and a unique challenge. By the way, this children's and women's hospital that we built, and you know I'm a pediatrician and I told you I was the CEO of a magnificent children's hospital. This children's hospital is second to none. The children's hospital that we have just built is one of the most spectacular children's hospitals in the nation from two perspectives. Both from the high touch perspective, and what I mean by that is the family-centered care perspective. What we mean by that is when a family comes to be a patient and family in our new children's hospital, it is the most glorious place that anybody could be. But also from the high-tech perspective. Somebody told me that they heard the Frank Beckman interview that I did yesterday on the radio, but I gave an example there. So one of the things that that hospital will have that other children's hospitals won't have is, for example, we will have an intraoperative MRI, something that maybe 3 other hospitals in the country have. But that's a unique feature. So the ability to have an MRI scan in the operating suite is extraordinarily unique, because what that means is that if you have a child who has a seizure disorder, the neurosurgeon, today what you do with a child like that is you prescribe anti-seizure medications, anticonvulsants, and for the most part, they're not very effective. They don't work. I once wanted to be a neurologist, and I didn't become a neurologist because I thought it would be very frustrating to use those anticonvulsants and essentially not effectively treat those children. But today, with an intraoperative MRI, the neurosurgeon will be able to, in the OR, pinpoint the seizure focus, and then, with a very precise manner, ablate the seizure focus in the operating room, and this child can be cured. So that's going to happen right here in Ann Arbor in a way that cannot be done anywhere else in the country. But, as you can imagine, that is exceedingly expensive. So that one MRI scanner alone costs $10 million. And so it's a unique facility. It's something that only we can offer, but it's exceedingly expensive, both to build and then, of course, to operate. So it's something that is remarkable, but it's an asset that we offer here at the University of Michigan. But again, it's something that is very unique. We have, of course, our struggling economy, and the other trend that we have that is unique, that is not unique here to us in Michigan, is what we're seeing that is happening in terms of a consolidation of physician practices, consolidation of providers, and consolidation of hospital facilities. So this is happening all across the state of Michigan. You're seeing it here in Ann Arbor, and you're seeing it very, very aggressively in Southeast Michigan. This is what you're seeing in Detroit. This is what you've heard about with Vanguard. This is what you've heard about with the purchase of the DMC, and this is certainly happening in Grand Rapids with Spectrum. So this is happening all throughout Michigan, but it's not just in Michigan. This is the competition that you're seeing across the entire country. So Michigan is a microcosm of consolidation of all components of the healthcare system. And we're seeing it, and we're actively involved with that too. And again, during the question period, I'd be happy to talk about that as well. The other example of what's changing is the reimbursement model. So you know very well that healthcare has been reimbursed in a fee-for-service model historically. Now, of course, we can argue that that was probably a bad way to be paid, because, you know, if you went to have your car fixed and they didn't fix it right, you could get your money back or go back again and say it wasn't fixed right, and they would pay. You wouldn't pay a second time. But of course, if I, or let's say, you know, a surgeon went and you got your hip fixed and it wasn't fixed right the first time and you got it fixed again, we would do cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. We'll keep charging you every time, right? Because that's the way we get paid. That's probably not the best way to be paid for healthcare, but that's how we've been doing it. And of course, you come into our hospital without any infections, and you come out with a urinary tract infection, we'll charge you for the urinary tract infection that we gave you. That's the way we make our money. Well, obviously that is not optimal, and that's part of what the whole idea was of healthcare reform. That's part of what was supposed to be reformed in healthcare reform. That was the whole concept. That was not the only part of the concept, but that was part of the concept, okay? But in the future, the idea is to try to change the reimbursement model, both to change it from a fee for service, but also to change so that we would be paying for population health. So not just that we would be paying for individual services, for individual cases, but also that we would be paying for populations. And that's the concept somebody mentioned during the introductions about accountable care organizations. That's what we mean by paying for populations of health. And so that's where we're headed. The next thing that is going to impact us in a terrible way is cuts cuts to a variety of different parts of what are essential things to our payment model. So we've written down here cuts to education funding. What we're talking about here is resident education. This is called GME, graduate medical education. Right now, we're potentially looking at a $17 million cut just to the University of Michigan. Similar cuts will happen to DMC if this goes through. But this isn't just to GME payment. This can happen for us to Medicaid payments, Medicare payments. So a lot of other cuts we're looking at on the horizon. And this has potentially devastating effects on what we would be looking at in terms of our existing models of how we do our business. That's the bad news. There's also good news, because we are ripe for innovation, creativity, discovery. And some of you in this room, and there's a good reason that Rob really asked for Dr. Starnes and Dr. Newton to talk about their businesses, because their businesses are prime examples of where there's incredible example of innovation and creativity. And as you heard from some of my colleagues from the University of Michigan, we are also a place that's ripe for innovation. So we are on the cusp of incredible examples of innovation. You heard today about some of the stem cell examples that are coming out. We've got incredible things that are happening in innovation. And so while there are some scary things on the horizon, I'm much more excited about the things that are happening in the area of creativity and innovation. And our vision for the future is that we will create the future of healthcare through discovery. And that is our motto. That's what we say we will do, because that is what we believe we will do. So now let me turn my attention to what Rob asked me to talk about, which is my concept of leadership. And I've tried to summarize this with what I call the 7 C's. And these are 7 principles that I think distinguish not only 7 principles that I think not only distinguish extraordinary individuals from ordinary individuals, but also I think that these principles distinguish extraordinary institutions from ordinary institutions. So I really think that you can apply qualities to institutions too, because institutions, after all, are really made up of people. They're not really, they're not inanimate objects. I mean, what are institutions? In my mind, institutions are actually made up of the people that work in the institutions. So I like to think of institutions as having qualities. And so I think of these 7 C's as being applicable to the institutions where the people work. But if the people in the institutions have these qualities, then the institutions have the qualities too. So let me tell you what I think they are, and let me give you my thoughts about these. So the first one that I think is an overriding principle is this doesn't even start with a C, it starts with an M, but it's the moral compass. And for me, I think about this as conscience. To me, this is the sort of foundation. It's a North Star. It's what you use to set your basic set of principles. It's what you distinguish as right from wrong. And for an individual, you have to think about what that is. What is your guiding principle? What is your North Star? What helps you to wake up in the morning and know why you get up in the morning? Why do you go where you go? What is that for you? Some of you who have either read some things that I've spoken about before or who have spoken with me before know that I oftentimes use a Jewish principle that I call tikkun olam, which is a Jewish principle that means to heal the world. And it's something that does matter to me. And it's the sense that you need to wake up with this sense that you have some sense of purpose. I'm going to come back to that in another one of these C's, but that is a guiding principle for me. So the second C is compassion. And W.H. Auden said, "We're all here on earth to help others. What I don't understand is, what are the others here for?" Compassion is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes and say, what are they feeling? I have to tell you that the 25,000 people that work in our health system, they have compassion. And I wanted you to know that in the last 4 months, I have experienced this compassion in a very special way since my husband died. And by the way, not just from the people in the health system, but the outpouring from the entire Ann Arbor community has been extraordinary. So, but I have to say that one of the reasons why people have so much compassion is because you have this ability to see that whatever you have experienced is not necessarily worse than what someone else experiences. And that ability, I think, is what is really important. So when you can say, you know, what I have is bad, but somebody else has it worse. So I think that's really wonderful. The third C is contribution. Contribution is, again, very similar to this moral compass, and that is this notion that you need to feel when you get up in the morning that you're going to do something important with your life. You know, it's the sense that you don't just go to work to pull in a paycheck. You may pull in a paycheck, and I don't have a problem with the idea of doing good and doing well. I'm looking at Allison, who's our communications expert, because she heard me use that comment the other day, and she said, I never heard you say that before, but I have said it before, because it's okay to do good and do well. But it's the notion that you would want to make a difference. So Anne Frank, who lived in the most dire of circumstances, wrote in her diary when she was 16 years old. She wrote in her diary, isn't it wonderful that no one need wait even a single moment before starting to make the world a better place. And you know, it's unfortunate, of course, that she didn't live in her own way to really make the world a better place, but yet she did, because you know, she was able to write this in her diary. The diary survived, and she meant to do that. And so I really do encourage everyone in our organization to try to make that contribution. And again, I think institutions that have it as part of their goal to make a contribution really do that as well. The next C is communication, and I really feel strongly about this because you know, if you just have all these great ideas and you have all these other C's but you don't tell anybody about it, it really doesn't matter, because you haven't really done your job. Because if you keep this all to yourself and you don't share it with someone else, you really haven't done anything with it. And so I really feel strongly about it. So shortly after I came here, I actually hired Allison into our office because I really didn't think I could do enough to communicate what I wanted to communicate on my own. And so Allison actually is hired here as a communications person, specifically so that I could be sure that I had a way to get my message out to our 25,000 people. So it was a role that I thought was so important that I actually hired someone specifically for communications. Because again, you can have all these great ideas, but if you don't have a way to share them with others, it just won't get out there. The sixth C is collaboration, and I think this is something that we do in Ann Arbor better than in a lot of other places. And Rob, I really want to applaud what you're doing here today. CEOConnect is a great example of collaboration because it's something that really happens here better than almost any place. This is a wonderful example of that. Henry Ford said, coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress, but staying together is success. And so I really think that collaboration is really key. I think we do that really well here, and I think it's really important. For me, though, the spicy sauce, you know, the one thing that really, really makes the difference between those truly extraordinary individuals or institutions and the ordinary ones is the final C, and that's creativity. Because there are a lot of really great people that really mean well and that really do a good job, but those that are superstars are really the creative ones. And I think that's the special sauce. You know, and I know I have an art interest and a music interest, and I guess we think of creative people as artists and musicians and poets and writers, and they're creative for sure. But the truth of the matter is that you need creativity even in boring jobs like administrators, bankers. Some people are bankers. I think bankers are boring. Lawyers. I put myself in there with the boring people. But you've got to have creativity to do those jobs really well. If you want to be extraordinary in those boring professions, you really do have to have creativity, especially in those boring jobs. You know, people expect you to be creative if you're an artist. They don't expect you to be creative if you're a banker. But if you want to do it exceptionally well, you have to be creative. And it is those people that apply creativity in those unique places that do those exceptional things. So if we're going to turn the economy around here in Michigan, and if we're going to do something extraordinary at NCRC, and if we're going to do amazing things here in our respective universes, we better figure out ways to do it creatively. Now, I think there are special tips to getting towards creativity, like what we're doing here today. So here's one of the tips that I think you can get by if you're not really creative in your core. And this is where collaboration is one of those shortcuts to creativity. So I'm not that creative, let's say. And let's say you're not creative, and let's say you're not creative. But here's one of the shortcuts to creativity. Put us all together. You know what you know, I know what I know, and you know what you know. And let's say we're going to tackle a particular problem. Put us all in the same room and mix us up. Well, we might be able to tackle the same problem knowing what we each know well, but we know the different things. So when we apply ourselves to that particular problem with our respective knowledge bases, chances are we're going to come up with a novel way to approach it because we know different things. And so we'll come up with an unusual solution to the problem. So that's a shortcut to creativity. And that's why collaboration, I think, is really important. Let me end my section so I leave a couple minutes for conversation. I'm sorry, Rob, we're kind of running over. Okay, with my 5 points for leadership. And so the first one is that I think that successful leaders are always happy. I don't know if this is always true, but I think and first of all, they're not always happy, let me just say that. But in general, they're happy. But here's something that you've got to be able to distinguish. They're happy, but not content. So you have to understand the difference between happy and content. So I have to admit I wasn't always happy in these last 4 months. I can tell you the truth. Okay, but there is a big difference between happy and content. So I am never content, because here's what contentedness leads to, and that's what these little things here are in this arrow. Contentedness leads, there's a difference between happy and satisfied. Sorry, satisfied. If you're too satisfied, then you're going to be content. If you're content, you're going to become complacent. And if you're complacent, you're going to be satisfied with mediocrity. And that's the problem. So there's a big difference between being happy and being satisfied. So you should be happy, but you shouldn't be satisfied. So you got to get happy, but not satisfied. So people tell me ask me this question, what do you do if you're not happy? Because sometimes you might find yourself not happy. And that is possible. So if you find yourself not happy, then there is something you should do. Because you should not allow yourself to not be unhappy, or to be unhappy. So I do have a few tips for what you should do if you're not happy. So if you find yourself not happy, this isn't on your slide, but here are 4 little tips for what you should do. 4 P's. You can write this down if you want, but whatever. Okay, so here's Aura's 4 P's for what you do if you're not happy. The first thing you have to do is make yourself happy, and if you're not happy, you have to figure out what's making you unhappy. So the first one is you have to push or press or do something to change the situation to get happy. Because if there's something making you miserable, then you've got to push for something to change that circumstance to make you happy. It might require lobbying for some change. It's something usually in your environment that you can change. But you got to figure out what it is and then push for that change that's going to make you happy. If that doesn't work, because sometimes you push your boss or your wife or your children to change whatever it is and it doesn't work. They don't they don't respond. So if that doesn't work, then you've got to go to the second P. The second P is thinking how unhappy you really were in the first place with whatever it was that you thought made you unhappy. And sometimes you can convince yourself that actually it wasn't that big a deal. And you can get happy with whatever the circumstance was, and then you can get to the second P, and that means you can put up with it. And you can decide that it isn't really worth moving or doing something that big a deal about it, and you can put up with it. But if you've pushed hard for it, if you've tried to put up with it, and you're still miserable, you are not going to be successful. And so you have to move to the third P, which is you have to pull out. You have to leave. And if that's the case, you really do have to leave. And the fourth P is, regardless, you have to play. You have to get happy. You have to be satisfied. And so, not satisfied, you have to play. So you have to be happy. Otherwise, you will not be a successful leader. Okay, let me just quickly run through the last 3 tips. And the second lesson is very important to spend your time on those things that yield the highest return on investment. How many of you have heard of Alfredo Pareto? Okay, good. So the 80-20 rule. So that's really the point that this Italian economist, Alfredo Pareto, said, 80% of the economy in Italy came from 20% of the people. I know we don't have a newspaper here anymore in Ann Arbor, but where's the Ann Arbor Chronicle? Observer, sorry. Apologize. But 80% of the news is in about 20% of the Observer. The rest of it has a lot of advertisement.
We need those.
We need the ads to get the news that we get there. Right. And in our health system, I have to tell you that about 80% of the complaints that I get, which is a lot of complaints, but we do get a lot of compliments too, comes from about 20% of our patients. And I have to always also tell you that about 80% of the value of the work that you do comes from about 20% of the things that you spend your time on. So spend your time on those 20%. So figure out what is going to give you the most bang for the buck and spend your time on those 20% of things. That's a good way to figure out how you should spend your time. I have a lot to do. I have to spend my time on those things that are going to give us the highest return on investment. I have 25,000 people report to me. We have a $3 billion budget. I can't answer every single message and do every single thing that everybody wants me to do. I have to spend my time on the things that are going to yield that 80% return on investment. I can't do everything. Same thing applies to you. Second message, embrace change as an opportunity to reassess, realign, and reinvent. So I love what Winston Churchill said, which is that a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And that's what we did as a health system and as a university when we made the decision to purchase the former Pfizer facility. That's exactly what we did. It sat vacant for 3 years. Now, I know that there was a lot of discussion about the fact that we're not paying taxes there, but I understand that. That was a real issue, right? But it was vacant. Nobody was paying taxes on it. So we could have it continue to sit vacant and nobody will pay taxes on it, or we could seize the opportunity, carpe diem, and do what we're doing there. And we're doing a lot there. So I think it's great that we've seized that opportunity. So there's an example of that. And the fourth lesson, don't be afraid to fail. Too many people are afraid to take risks. If you haven't failed, you haven't done enough. I can tell you that I could tell you lots of examples of things that I have failed at. And I'm proud of every failure that I have. I am more proud of my failures than I am of my successes, because every one of my failures has led to a subsequent success. And so I really believe in failure. And people who cannot recount their failures have not had successes, or they haven't had enough successes. So you should be as proud of your failures as you are of your successes. And I'm very proud of my failures. And finally, never stop learning. And so I want to end with these wonderful quotes, one from C.S. Lewis, who said, "Experience that most brutal of teachers. But you learn, my God, do you learn?" And Eartha Kitt, who said, "I am learning all the time. The tombstone will be my diploma." Thank you very much.
I do. All right, great. So, David?
Yeah, I'll try. I just spent investment conference and listened to a couple of strategists, and also Mario Cuomo spoke, and it was very fascinating. But one of the things they talked about was all the things that you talked about, the very beginning of the talk, that are up again. And Dodd-Frank was talked about. We had a Federal Reserve executive there, official from the Fed, and they talked about 420 studies that are underway, many of which will never be completed, which is not possible. A lot of indecision. How do you work through that in managing the health system, the size and complexity that you have as you look at this uncertainty?
Well, so I think that's a really fair question, and for those of you that didn't hear. So the question is, there's so much indecision, and there's so many things that we have to decide, and you don't know whether to go forward or not go forward on them. So there are things that we do know that we have to decide, and we have to go forward on. So we do the best that we can. We are going forward on many decisions, and we make assumptions. So, and I assume you're asking me specifically on healthcare reform decisions. So we have made the decision, we have made the assumption that the accountable care organization-like process is going to go forward. So let me answer that one, because that's what I assume you're referring to. So we assume that, for those of you in the know on this, that ACOs will happen in one way, shape, or form. And for those of you that do know, our program at the University of Michigan was one of 10 pilot studies in the Medicare demonstration project that actually was one of only 2 that demonstrated year-over-year success in both yielding results, positive results, with respect to the outcome measures, and also generating dollars for Medicare year over year over year. And so we assume that the ACOs will go forward. So that's an example of an assumption that we have made. We don't know for sure, but we have decided that that is likely to happen, both because we assume that it will happen and because we assume it is the right thing to happen. And therefore, we're moving forward on that assumption. So that's an example of something that we're moving forward on. Furthermore, we believe that it will save costs in the long run to do it. So there are certain things like that that we will do. The other way that I make decisions, this is me personally, is, and I'm looking at my team because they know this, and I tell them this almost every day. I always use this principle. I'm looking at you so that you can confirm to the nod. I always say, do the right thing. Whenever in doubt, when you're not sure, we don't always know what the right thing is, but ask yourself the question, does it seem like it's the right thing? And again, that's where I use this point about moral compass. Sometimes it's a moral decision, sometimes it's not a moral decision, but it seems like the right thing. And when you weigh out on balance, you know, the pros and the cons, it seems like the right thing. Now, it's not always the right thing. I mean, and I have to say, don't be afraid to fail, because we have made mistakes. We've made mistakes since I've come. I've made mistakes here since I've come. So, I want to say that, candidly, okay? But I'm not afraid to fail, I'm not afraid to make decisions, and I'm not afraid to do the right thing. So as long as you abide by those principles, in general, you'll make the right decisions, and you'll make mistakes. So, you know, I'll just tell you candidly, I will make mistakes, but I will always try to do the right thing. I will always try to do them with integrity, and so I will not get written up in the Ann Arbor Chronicle for lying or cheating. Observer. Sorry, observer. I will probably make that mistake again. But I will not get written up for lying or cheating or killing someone, you know, inadvertently or advertently killing someone. But I will make a mistake. But it will not be on purpose. Okay, so those are the principles that guide us. So that's the way I make decisions. But will we make a mistake? Yeah. And will we potentially lose money? Yeah. And that's all I can tell you. I don't know if that's helpful.
You're into C. As you're into the letter C, I was just curious on your thoughts. You see a greater future in Michigan for collaboration between healthcare systems versus competition?
Well, first of all, it's a great question, and it leads me to one of the words that I love, which is called co-opetition. So thanks for the question. Let me use that word, which I didn't coin. I wish I coined it, but it would be plagiarism if I coined it, if I told you I coined it. But I love the word because, you know, co-opetition is collaboration and competition. Absolutely, and I'll give you a great example right now. Our relationship with St. Joe's is a great example of collaboration and competition. In some areas we collaborate, in other areas we compete, but we have a great relationship. And so there are lots of examples of that, where there's both collaboration and competition. And I think it's healthy to have that. And so I think it's a perfect example of what we should be doing. But furthermore, there are lots of examples where we should be having perhaps what we might call loose partnerships with many other, what we might have considered in the past, competitors in our industry, but where now we should be developing partnerships. And they might not be full, in bed, affiliations, but we should be having partnerships. I totally agree. But in other places, we're going to compete because we can't have the same patient be in bed, in both in our beds and in another facility's bed. That's a great question.
That's okay.
I'll take, okay, go ahead. All right.
You talked about the unique arrangement here and why you came, where the medical school and the hospital system both report to you. Could you give an example of how that benefits the people of Michigan?
Yeah, well, so first of all, let me just say that in most of the other places, I'll stand back here so everybody can see. So the question was, why does it benefit people that the hospital and the medical school are in the same system? In most other places where the hospital is not connected to the medical school, the hospital keeps its profits and doesn't put the profits back into the academic medical center. So the advantage of our system is that profits flow from the hospital back into the academic medical center, feeding the academic mission. And so what that does, to a large extent, is it supports the education and research missions of the University of Michigan, which is one of the reasons why our medical school is one of the top 10 medical schools in the country. And that very tight linkage is of tremendous benefit to the people of Michigan, but to the whole academic institution. It's one of the reasons why we have such a robust research engine here. In many other places, like where I came from, there's so much time, energy, and money spent on the battles between the hospitals and the medical school. It's unbelievable how much energy is wasted on that, plus the fact that the money doesn't flow that way. So it's unbelievably beneficial. Dick?
Do you see any space in the healthcare model that would allow for support wellness and prevention?
That's a great question. The question about preventive medicine. And absolutely, first of all, if you think about cost savings, so much of our healthcare dollar, the majority of the healthcare dollar is spent at the beginning of life and at the end of life. That's where the majority of the healthcare dollar is spent right now. In the neonatal intensive care stage and at the last 90 days of life. So if we could do things to prevent injury, prevent illness, and save costs during those time periods, or illness altogether, it's so much less costly, we would be doing a tremendous service. So it would be fantastic for us to do that. And by the way, that's one reason that we at the university are, and those of you that work with us, are working to try to develop methods and to spend money on preventive health. And that's part of our employee engagement efforts, which is to improve the health of our own employees. We have over 40,000 employees. So we are working, we're not only a healthcare provider, we're an employer. And we are working to improve the health of our own employees. There's a very important reason we do that. One of the reasons is cost. The other reason, of course, is we'd like them to be a more productive workforce. And then the third reason is, again, what I said at the very beginning, it's the right thing to do. We want people to be healthy. It's for no other reason. It doesn't have to just be a cost reason. It's a good thing for people to have quality of life.
I want to go back to your
you talked about how you came to Michigan, and when Mary Sue Coleman called you about the Pfizer facility. You said that the NCRC was transformational in your decision to come. Now, I know you didn't talk about the fact that you were involved with establishing the Discovery Park and Research Park at Purdue. And my question is, how are you, as the person who's most involved in all the research that's being done at the university in both basic science as well as medical, that's translational in the medical school and in the hospitals, how are you going to balance, if you will, the teeter-totter of what is U of M centric versus which is Michigan economy centric, and helping not be too focused on U of M only, but look beyond your boundaries to ensure that this will help the economy of Michigan as well?
First, I just need to clarify so people don't give me credit for something I didn't do. I was on the board at Discovery Park. I didn't found it.
Well, but
Okay.
you were helpful in making it a success, no question.
Thank you, but I think that's overstating my contributions. But in any case, I hope they say it. And the point.
They told to me when I was down there that you were very helpful in making that happen.
That's very nice. So the reason for this discussion, this tete-a-tete, is that I was at Indiana University. Purdue University was a competitor. So it's very nice that at Purdue, they said that I was helpful. So that's really very nice. And I was helpful. You know, there was a sibling rivalry between IU and Purdue. So it's very nice.
That doesn't exist in the state of Michigan.
Yeah. So it's very nice that they said that I was helpful. I was actually very helpful. And I was very collaborative. I worked very hard to develop collaborative relationships between Indiana University and Purdue University. So it actually is very nice to hear that they said that at Purdue, because I did work hard on that. But I didn't. I was a board member at Purdue's Discovery Park. In any case, thank you, Roger. But I will say the same thing here about Michigan. So obviously my job entails making sure that NCRC is as successful as possible. At the same time, my job is to ensure that Michigan's economy is as successful as possible. These are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are interdependent. So if NCRC is a booming success, then Michigan's economy will be a booming success. So in contrast to maybe the Purdue thing, where maybe somebody could say that they were competitive, these two things are completely aligned. So there's no competition at all. And in fact, let's just give a very specific and direct example. You know that we have built an accelerator there at NCRC. My wildest dream, I mean, it's not a wild dream, it's a real dream, and it's not at all unlikely. We already have 5 companies in there, not including the Borough Farm company. So 6 companies are actually already there on that place. The accelerator can only have little baby companies in there. We can't have big companies. As soon as those companies are ready to emerge from their incubated state, they gotta go someplace. They've gotta become Asperians. I mean, we've gotta get them to grow up and become companies like your companies. So they've got to flourish and get incubated and start to fertilize the rest of the state. I mean, that's the whole goal of this thing. So I think it's not at all competitive. In fact, it's the whole idea is for them to become embryonic in the NCRC. And by the way, that's not the only place they have to go. And success breeds success. As soon as we get a critical mass of things happening here in Ann Arbor, then we'll start to populate the rest of Ann Arbor and the rest of the state. So I think these things are, and you and I think, share common ideas about this. I don't see this as competitive at all.
So if there's a non-Michigan U of M based technology that needs space for commercial success, they could look to the NCRC potentially?
Absolutely, and first of all, let me just say, the very first company that went into NCRC, Borough Farm, is a result of it's an MSU company. So the very first, just so everybody knows this, the very first company that went into NCRC is not from the University of Michigan. It's an MSU company.
Thank you very much.
And
some people have been asking me that question, and I've said, I don't know, but I'm going to see all of you.
absolutely, absolutely, there's no, I mean, and would you like to confirm that?
Well, the first part, I confirm that. However, the first priority in the initial incubator accelerator is for spin-off companies. So there's another process for the incubator accelerator, but there's another process for vetting other companies that have the potential to use that space. And so there is a process for doing it.
Very important to hear.
All right, can I ask you a question? The other way around.
But not the whole facility.
Right.
And,
No, I
and,
understand.
So Marvin hasn't been asked that question that often. Will you confirm?
Yes. The hesitation worried me.
Last time he was asked that was, do you say I do? So the question I have is that we're often coming to you, to the university, for favors, for cultivating opportunities. And I guess I want to take that John F. Kennedy quote. What can we do for you? What do you need from the business community to be successful?
well, first of all, I wanted to say this has been awesome. So I really enjoyed it. I think you guys are really terrific. You have to tell us candidly what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. We don't mind criticism. We don't mind critique. We enjoy it. It tells us how we can get better. So we like it. And I don't mind pushback of any sort. I hope you appreciate that. So tell us what we need to do to get better. I think that's really, really helpful. And I think we need to work collectively. So just let's do more.
Maybe a little bit more specific. I know, for example, with life science, you had a hard time for many years finding the right person. I think it was before you came to run that. Because of recruiting problems. Roger, we've talked about that when I consulted with you. You had a hard time finding a medical director. What can a community do to present itself better so that you can recruit the right people? Maybe that's good. Because you have realtors, bankers, all kinds of people here that can help with that.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. Last night I took a candidate out to dinner, candidate for our development effort, and he said, well, Ann Arbor's very nice, but boy, you should see what we hear and learn about Michigan in general and Detroit. And you know, the press is just so bad about Michigan. It's really terrible. I mean, it's not your press, you know, but I mean, but it's terrible. I mean, you know, the way Michigan is presented, they said except for the golf, this is what he told me, and this was a very smart candidate, but he said, except for what I see about the golf courses, and I don't play golf, everything I see about Michigan just sucks.
Where's he from?
Minnesota. I mean, it was just, you know, it's just horrible. And I've seen it, and I've heard this now from several people. I mean, we had people at the NCRC last week, and they came from all over the country, and they said exactly the same thing. You know, they think everything they hear and see about Detroit makes them think that we live in a third world country. And by the way, they don't know what the geography is of Ann Arbor versus Detroit. I didn't either, actually. You know, nobody understands that. And they either think that we're light years away from Detroit, and that the problem with that is they have no concept of where the airport is relative. So that's a problem because they think the airport's very far. That's what I thought. Or they think we're in Detroit's backyard, in which case they think that we're the same as Detroit. So either way, it's a problem. So that's a problem. I mean, I think maybe talking about communication, you know, somehow we've got to get some other kind of message out.
One of my last position at Michigan before opening my own company was as the director of dual career recruitment for the college at LS&A. And I think what this speaks to is how imperative it is for the university to partner with real estate agents, with bankers, with community members to orchestrate a very thoughtful and inviting visit for all candidates, so that it's not just that we're telling them what a wonderful place Ann Arbor and Michigan is to live, but we're showing them. We're helping them experience it in a very rich way. And that ultimately means really partnering with multiple business owners and with our chamber and with others throughout the county to be successful in those recruitments.
Give it to Bob back here.
I would agree 100% about Michigan. We just went out and raised capital last fall, and if we hadn't been headquartered in Ann Arbor, we would have never done it because the image of this state is just there's a big red circle around our state about how people view it, from people that want to invest capital to others. And I would here today, on behalf of the Michigan Bankers Association, say we've stepped up and we've supported Governor Snyder's plan. Not that we agree with everything, because we have one opportunity here to change our state, and it's now. Because if we don't change the state today, we're in deep trouble. I just traveled another part of the state the last 3 days, and they're very depressed because all that's left are retirees or people without jobs, because all the young people are leaving. So we have to do, and I admire what you're doing and what the university has done, picking up that Pfizer facility, but it's about creating jobs, creating hope, and keeping our young people here in Ann Arbor, in the state of Michigan. If we don't change our state, we've got a tough road ahead of us.
I want to say one more thing, because I don't want it to slip by, and this is a little bit different, but I think, and I don't know if Allison will agree, that it's really important that you continue to give the message as a female leader, that it's important not only to do good, but do well. I think that's a great message, and women and men need to hear that, particularly as we see President Pullman's salary being questioned. I think that it's important that women feel very confident that they should do well.
I wanted to ask, since we've given Patricia such a hard time, but you're a newspaper publisher, and I wonder if you could speak to some of this challenge about how to present the state in a positive image. I know you guys do a great job of presenting positive articles in the Observer. You have been for over 30 years, but can you just speak to that a little bit?
Our focus, as you know, is primarily Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County. And in my business, it's important for us not to present information in a total positive light. We have to share information that's compelling and interesting, but it also has to be factual. And if you have journalism focusing primarily on all sort of positive puff pieces, people aren't going to read it. It's not serious journalism. So you've got to include serious journalism in order to tell a journalism, because we have a moral compass. We have to provide information as we see it, as we hear it, and it's got to be accurate.
It's interesting because I know a lot of movement these days is to Facebook, and in a way we control a lot of the message. I see a lot of people, Meg, you do great with this, Mike Finney does great, but putting positive stories out there on Facebook, and that goes all over the world. So I think, we can try to take some of this back, not pass on the negative stories about Detroit. It's sad, but I mean, Detroit is 700,000 people in the state at this point. It's not the whole state by any means. So I think, I'd like to see us all take the message you're giving us already and try to do something about it. It's in our control.
Just keep giving us some positive message stories, but we can incorporate those into the features.
You've heard some today here.
Kind of leave it on
Yeah, one over here. Let us know when you're, this is a great conversation, but when you have to go, that's fine. So we'll maybe take 2 more questions. Right.
This isn't a question, it's a comment. I'm one of the realtors in the room. We've been writing our own news because the media is so negative about what's going on that we decided we needed to create our own stories because it wasn't truly reflective of what was happening here. When you're asked, as we always are, how's the real estate market, everybody expects you to say it's terrible, but it's not. We've been doing very well this year. We did very well last year. It definitely has turned the corner in our county, and it's beginning to turn the corner over where I live in Oakland County too. I can see a difference. So that's what we've been doing, is creating our own story. A few years ago, we took all of our top agents on a bus ride down to Detroit and toured them around all of the new and great buildings that are down there, Comerica Park and all the stuff that's cool, because they all felt the same way, that Ann Arbor is the center of the universe and we're stuck with Detroit. Well, you take them all down there and show them what's happening, and suddenly they get all excited about it. And so you send our 150, 170 agents out there as ambassadors to the area, and you get a whole different effect.
One more?
Well, just put in a couple of comments as a community leader, and also, I know Roger's on Ann Arbor Spark, and there's a lot, I've heard more positive image in this area. I think maybe that would be some speakers that might end up being well connected, specifically to your issue about bringing candidates, because like you, I moved here actually from DC, and I'd never been in Michigan. No offense, but never heard of Ann Arbor, because I didn't hear University of Michigan. So I'm not a football, my background, I grew up sailing, so that was my passion. And so I came home from work, having a really great job in DC, to a husband that had a job offer here, and I was the same. But I had a tour, so that was a great opportunity. But what I would suggest is you work with a CBB and Ann Arbor Spark, because we do talent recruitment and marketing. And then you should have Sue Mosey come and talk about Midtown Detroit.
Great.
Rob? In terms of image, I've been helping with one of A2 New Tech spinoff, Detroit New Tech, and also connecting with Motor City Connect and Tech Town people. And there's a lot of stuff going on at the grassroots level that the general public doesn't know about. New Tech has an event coming up next Tuesday called D Movement, and it's all about integrating the innovators in Southeast Michigan. It's going to be at Schoolcraft Community College. So go to the D New Tech website and look at the event for next Tuesday. I'll be videotaping and live streaming it also. But that's going to give you an idea of what's coming. There's a lot of collaboration now, as you were saying, in cooperation. And so this is starting to happen. We just need to keep it going.
We got a lot of energy going here.
I just want to make one comment, because I think it relates to both the comments you made. I've got a number of clients all around the country, many in Minneapolis or Minnesota. They have a higher tax rate than we do, and there's very little complaints about taxes in Minnesota because they think they get value for the taxes that they pay. And I think that's important for how we put our lives in perspective, and health system in perspective, that I think you find probably in your health system that fees aren't discussed as much if your customer, your patients, feel they get value for the service provided. And I think that's an important thing that we always have to come back to and remember, that we have to create value if we're going to be successful. And what's unique about Ann Arbor, I think, and why we talked about the word community. The community here, I think, is cohesive. The C words just keep popping up. Cohesive, and they bring together, and the communication through the Observer and other mediums sends that message. And I think we all have to be ambassadors for value in our state, whether it be a perception value or a real value. And we can make Michigan a great state if we communicate the right things.
I just wanted to share a personal story, but first of all, address the comment that you made about our percentages. 80-20, it's not 60-40. 60% advertising, 40% editorial content. And also, we do have co-opetition with the Ann Arbor Chronicle, which I respect Mary and Dave and what they're doing with their on-site newspaper publication too. If you haven't checked it out, I recommend it. We have a reciprocal link on our websites and work very well together cooperatively. But a personal story relating, in fact, to how we can work together in terms of developing a better quality of life introduction to potential candidates who are coming to this community and looking at it as a place to settle. I was at a dance class when my daughter was teaching a class. There was a gentleman there watching his daughter in the class. We struck up a conversation. He asked what I did. I told him that I published the Observer. He said, "Oh, You're the reason I'm in Ann Arbor. I'm a neurosurgeon at the University of Michigan. I would never have considered Ann Arbor. Someone sent me a copy of your publication. I reconsidered, came for the interview, and decided to locate here. So there you go.
Laura, it's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you for being so open, and your leadership lessons were really great. I'm very inspired, and I'm going to go do all C things today. So.
Thank you all.
The truth. We'll see you all back here on May 20th, where Grady Hope is going to be the speaker. So when you get your invitation, you probably should respond quickly, because if we hold it here, we're thinking about maybe expanding to another facility. If somebody knows, or we might have a larger auditorium, let me know. But we will fill up quickly, so get your request back quickly. Again, thank you, Aura, and thank you all for the conversation. It's great. Stick around, have some food and coffee, and the place will be open until you leave. So talk to you later.